You look at the bill. The service was fine. Not amazing, not bad. Just fine. And yet your hand is already doing the math, rounding up, adding another few dollars you didn't plan to spend. You tell yourself it's guilt. It isn't. The real reason is stranger than that, and it has almost nothing to do with how the meal went. Picture the moment right before you sign. You will likely never see this server again. You're not building a relationship. There is no return visit guaranteed, no future favor being earned, no reason rooted in pure self-interest to hand over extra money to a stranger you'll forget by next week. And yet you do it anyway, almost automatically, often before you've even finished chewing your last bite. The economist Ofer has spent years studying exactly this contradiction, and he calls it the tipping puzzle. In classic economic theory, a tip should function like a reward for good service, paid to encourage that same good service next time. But most of the time, there is no next time. You're a tourist in a city you'll never return to. You're at a restaurant near the airport you'll never walk into again. The transaction is already complete, the food already eaten, the exchange already closed. Azar's research points out that a truly self-interested, rational actor would tip nothing in that situation, because there is no future benefit left to protect. And yet tipping rates barely change whether you're a regular or a stranger passing through once. There's another detail in Azar's work that makes the puzzle even harder to explain with pure incentive theory. Tipping customs vary enormously from country to country, in ways that have almost nothing to do with how well restaurants function. In Japan, tipping is not expected and can even be seen as slightly rude, yet service is often meticulous. In parts of Europe, a small service charge is already built into the bill, and diners leave little or nothing extra, without waiters delivering noticeably worse meals as a result. If tipping were the thing keeping service quality high, removing it should cause service to collapse. It doesn't. Restaurants in non-tipping cultures run just fine, which suggests the entire system, at least on the customer side, is doing something other than what it claims to be doing. So if it isn't strategy, and if you're telling yourself it isn't guilt either, what is actually happening in your head at that table? The researcher Michael Lin, at Cornell School of Hotel Administration, has run dozens of studies trying to answer exactly that question by comparing how much people tip against how good the service actually was. If tipping were mainly about rewarding quality, tip size should track closely with service quality. It doesn't. Lin's research consistently finds only a weak connection between the two, something in the range of a small single-digit percentage of the variation in tip size. In other words, whether the server was excellent or merely adequate barely moves the number you leave behind. Something else, something almost entirely unrelated to how well you were served, is doing most of the work. Here's where it gets specific enough to feel a little uncomfortable. Lin found that servers who briefly touch a customer's arm or shoulder while delivering the check receive noticeably higher tips, even though the touch has nothing to do with the food or the service itself. Servers who crouch down to make eye contact at the table, rather than standing over the customer, also see their tips rise. Servers who write "thank you" on the back of the receipt or draw a small smiley face next to the total walk away with more money in their pocket than servers who hand over an identical bill with no personal mark on it at all. None of these things change the taste of the meal. All of them change how the customer feels about the person standing in front of them in that specific moment. And there's a detail from this same body of research that tends to surprise people the most. In a well-known experiment on the effect of small gifts, researchers tracked tip size across 3 conditions: no mint with the check, 1 mint with the check, and 2 mints with the check. 1 mint increased tips by around 3% compared to no mint at all. 2 mints increased tips by around 14%, nearly 5 times the effect of the first mint alone. But the detail that really stands out involved the 4th condition, where the server delivered 1 mint, started to walk away, then turned back and said something like, "For you nice people, here's an extra mint," and left a second one behind. That small, seemingly spontaneous gesture, the unexpected extra mint, produced the largest tip increase of all, even bigger than simply handing over 2 mints at once from the start. The food was identical in every version. The price was identical. The only thing that changed was a tiny, low-cost signal that the server saw you as a person worth a small, unscripted kindness. What makes this finding so striking is how little it actually cost the restaurant. A single piece of candy, worth a few cents, was enough to shift customer behavior in a measurable, repeatable way across an entire study. The researchers weren't manipulating the food, the price, the wait time, or anything a customer would normally list as a reason to tip more. They were manipulating one small signal of personal attention, delivered in under 2 seconds, and watching a percentage of extra income appear on the table as a direct result. This lines up with something the psychologist Robert Cialdini has written extensively about, a principle he calls reciprocity. Human beings feel a strong, often unconscious pull to return a favor once one has been given to them, even a tiny one, even one that cost the giver almost nothing. A single mint on a check plate isn't really a gift of candy. It's a small social signal, and your brain responds to that signal the same way it would respond to a genuine act of generosity from someone who chose to notice you. Now here's the part that connects all of this back to what's happening at your own table. None of these effects are about the food. None of them are about whether your order arrived on time or your water glass stayed full. They're about whether you felt seen for a few seconds as an individual person rather than as a transaction moving through a system. And your response to that feeling isn't calculated guilt. It's something closer to an old social reflex, one that evolved long before restaurants, long before money, long before strangers passing through cities they'll never visit again. For most of human history, you lived in small groups where almost everyone you interacted with, you would interact with again. Reputation wasn't optional. If you took something from someone and gave nothing back, word traveled fast in a group of 30 or 40 people, and your standing in that group would suffer for it. Generosity, and the visible return of generosity, was how you signaled that you were safe to cooperate with, safe to trust, worth including in the next hunt or the next harvest. That instinct didn't have an off switch installed for modern strangers. Your brain still runs the same ancient software, even in a restaurant where the server will forget your face within the hour. Think about how strange this would have looked to someone living in one of those small ancestral groups. To them, a stranger you would never see again, someone entirely outside your community, simply didn't exist as a category worth worrying about. Every person you dealt with was someone you might need again next season, or whose cousin you might need, or whose opinion of you would eventually reach someone who mattered. Modern cities full of one-time interactions, anonymous servers, drivers, cashiers, and delivery workers you will never cross paths with twice, are an environment your underlying social wiring never evolved to expect. And yet the wiring doesn't check first. It doesn't pause to confirm whether this particular stranger is worth the reputational investment. It just fires the same way it always has, because for nearly all of human history, that shortcut was almost never wrong. This is also why groups tip differently than individuals eating alone. Research on tipping behavior has repeatedly found that when people are dining with others who can see how much they leave, tips tend to rise, sometimes significantly, compared to when a person eats and pays completely by themselves with nobody watching. If tipping were purely a private transaction between you and a service provider, who else was at the table shouldn't matter at all. But it does, because part of what's being paid for, without you ever consciously deciding this, is your own reputation. You are managing how generous you appear, even to people who have nothing to do with the restaurant, even in a room full of strangers you'll also likely never see again. Even the method of payment seems to nudge this old reflex. Studies on payment behavior have found that people tend to tip more when paying by card than when counting out cash by hand. Likely because handing over a physical stack of bills makes the size of the sacrifice more immediate and visible to the person doing it, while a card swipe or tap keeps the true cost pleasantly abstract. Remove the friction of counting money, and the ancient impulse to appear generous runs with even less resistance than before. So the guilt explanation, the one you probably reach for without thinking, isn't quite right. Guilt implies you did something wrong and are trying to make up for it. What's actually happening is closer to an ancient signal firing in a completely modern setting, A leftover reflex built for small tribes, now running inside a system of anonymous transactions, strangers, and one-time interactions it was never designed for. You're not apologizing for anything. You're performing an old, deeply human ritual of visible generosity, the same one your ancestors relied on to survive inside their communities. Except now, it's aimed at someone standing beside a table for less than 5 minutes, holding a small leather folder with a receipt inside. Which brings you back to the bill in front of you. Look at it again. The number written at the bottom isn't really a measurement of how good your meal was. It's closer to a reflex, inherited from thousands of years of living in groups small enough that every act of generosity was remembered, and now firing quietly inside you at a table where, this time, it almost certainly won't be. You round up anyway. You always do. Not because you feel guilty, because somewhere underneath the math, an old, patient instinct is still running the numbers for you.